We're going, Dr. Edward Mihalkanin.
Yes, Mr. Lawson. How are you today?
Thank you for being on the show for this inaugural episode. I wanted to ask you too, for the audience and for my own curiosity, give me a little bit of your background. Of you are a man, you are a Renaissance man of the social science variety, if I were to define it myself. So, what is
Well,
it?
you could define me that way. I am not going to define myself that way. You're very kind. I received my BA in political science from Bradley University, a good liberal arts college in Illinois, and then received my MA and PhD in international relations from American University in Washington, D.C. Part of the reasons why I have some knowledge about U.S. government is on my own. I have just read a substantial amount of U.S. history by very fine scholars over the years. Also, as part of my initial hiring here at Texas State University in 1990, that was when we were Southwest Texas State University. I was required to teach American government, both 2310 and 2320. And 2310 are the institutions and processes, separation of powers, checks and balances, the actual, here's the legislature, here's the executive, here's the judicial, what do they do, how do they interact? And then 2320 is public policy. And even though I stopped teaching 2320 some time ago, pretty much almost every single summer I've been teaching American Government 2310. And so obviously some of what I'm teaching now today will look different from what I was teaching in 1990. It's been 30 years. There's been changes, so I've dropped some things, I've added some things. And over the course of your life, you just see 34 years of changes in U.S. government, U.S. politics. And so it's for both of those reasons why I have more than a passing knowledge of U.S. government and politics.
And specific to international relations, my understanding of the history of international relations as a field is that it was kind of post-World War II that it really became a kind of a respected, seen as necessary kind of academic field in government. Kind of what has that evolution looked like, and especially into the internet age? How have those theories changed?
Well, you are right that there was more of a, you could call, explosion of interest in international relations after the end of World War II. The actual first school of international relations was actually founded in 1917 in the United States, in 1917 at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And in 1917, they established the Edmund S. Walsh School of Foreign Service. And so the idea was you're actually trying to train people for the State Department. As you say, though, after World War II, like my university, American University, established its School of International Service in the 1950s. And you have the Tufts School of Law and Diplomacy up in Boston. You have actually a newer, very fine international relations department at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Maurice East started that in the 1980s. I don't want to forget anybody. Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Service, even though Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore, the School of Advanced International Service is in Washington, D.C., right near DuPont Circle. And actually Dr. Doyle, a colleague of mine, actually comes from a PhD program in Colorado, which is very good. And this is the irony about, you're talking about overtime establishing and all that. Think of airplane technology in the 1940s. Literally, you really didn't have commercial airplanes that could travel from New York City to California. And so they would stop in Denver. And the Denver academicians at the universities snapped very quickly that, oh my God, we can buy, dinner and provide lodging and maybe a very small stipend, because most of the stipend is going to be paid for by the institutions in California. So that's really where you start having the beginnings of an international relations program at the university in Denver. And in fact, there was a very well-respected British, actually he was a Soviet historian, but actually also known in international relations scholarship by the name of E.H. Carr. And I remember the old dean, Dean Olson of the School of International Service, happened to be in Denver at the time. Late 1940s, people forget this. Britain was so poor that people were on food rations and actually coal rations. The worst winter in Britain since the reign of Queen Elizabeth I hit Britain in 1945-46. And it caused there to be a rationing of coal. So companies, producers, manufacturers that use coal reduced to 3 days a week of manufacturing. And so when E.H. Carr came over to, and I'm not making fun of the man, I mean, everybody was just, there wasn't a lot to eat. They had a pork chop dinner, and he worked on that pork chop so there was not one piece of meat left on the bone. That's how, even someone like a very well-respected international relations professor, there was just not a lot of food in the late 1940s. And so, but it is funny to me that the limitations of air technology actually gave a great opportunity for, people who realized the opportunity to actually be the basis of having internationally known scholars at budget prices. Yeah.
Huh. Well, walk me through how yesterday here at Texas State, we had a panel really touching on kind of international affairs and what foreign policy from the U.S.'s perspective looks like and how radically it's changed in the past few months. Walk me through how technology is changing that, and how one thing that, as Dr. Doyle, as you mentioned, pointed out, that this really kind of caught me off guard, is it's safe to say that we are ending an era that started roughly 1945, ending on January 20th, 2025. What does that look like, and what do you think moving forward American people can expect with how we view what we've known our whole lives as our allies?
This is what is so odd about this moment. Think back. I mean, we all experienced the 2024 presidential election. Mm-hmm. Did we talk a lot about, should we ally with Russia and Putin? Should we stop supporting Ukraine? What was our conversations as a people? We talked about, there were advertisements on television about trans athletes participating in college sports. Now, in fairness, candidate Trump did constantly talk about tariffs. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the other elements, when he was asked point blank, what about Project 2025? Mr. Trump said, I saw the clip saying, oh, I don't know anything about it. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry. That's simply not true. If you look at the documents of Project 2025 and you look at what is happening in his administration, it's chapter and verse. So to me, in some ways, President Trump is a, forgive the term, normal politician. He said things that he thought would increase his chance of winning that election last November. No, I don't know anything about 2025. I'm sorry, bovine scatology, made promises. Even if I get elected in November, even before I am inaugurated, the war in Ukraine will end.
Yeah.
He gets elected. Well, there's still a war. And not only that, he never picked up the phone to talk to Putin and say, hey, what about resolving this? Okay. Third, he was just misstating what the tariff does and how it's paid. And, oh, another thing. Prices will go down day one of my administration. Well, we've all been to a grocery store. Mm. And the prices haven't gone down. Now, in fairness to him, in fairness to President Trump, yeah, I don't think the president can do a lot about inflation. It really is what's happening in the economy. But he sold himself as, I'm a business person. I know what's going on. I promise you, day one, prices go down. And so to me, on one level, he's a very normal politician. What makes him so unique is the sheer number of people who, no matter what factual information you present to them that could be perceived to be negative, water off a duck's back. They simply don't care. They support him regardless of the content of his ideas because they think he is for them, however them is defined, right? And when they define themselves, it's not as them, it's obviously us. He is for us. And I was very upset when the assassination attempt happened in Pennsylvania. But a day later, I was thinking about it and I said, yeah, he's probably won the presidency because here he is, presidential candidate, really very close. I mean, it clipped his ear. Yeah. And so trust me, there are people in this country who viewed what happened as pretty much divine intervention. That Mr. Trump turning his head a second, half a second, quarter of a second, they thought that was literally divine intervention, saving him to help the country. And we've never had that kind of, for lack of a better term, messianic sense of any of our presidents. Yes, there's been huge respect for our presidents, Washington, Lincoln, but people forget, oh my God, the abuse, the verbal abuse, the abuse in print that Lincoln had before his assassination is astounding. Even though within the government, even with his cabinet, very bright people, it was basically, well, there's 7 of us here. It's 6-1, but I'm the one, so we're going with what I want, right? So he was a strong president in that way, but there's been nothing like even Reagan, right, who was able to change the Republican Party from what it had been under Eisenhower and Nixon. Even that dynamic, you did not have the American people and even the leadership say, oh, Reagan said X, it must be X, right? I mean, you would hear Republicans disagree with President Reagan. You don't have that. It's the deafening silence on so many different issues that is also extraordinarily different.
And have we ever seen before the complete, printed media in the U.S. and what the president says? Have we ever seen that be so split to this point to wherever it's not a disagreement over the facts. It's that both parties are working with entirely, quote unquote, different facts, Well,
that's a good point. I mean, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York years ago said, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. And sadly, we're in that state, right? Yeah. And this is part of the ecosphere, the communication network of and I don't want to call it conservative, okay? If you look at Project 2025, it's not conservative, it's reactionary. Wants to allow child labor. Well, that was made illegal in the 1930s. Wants to change Social Security. Basically, they want to gut Social Security. Yeah. Well, that was passed in 1935. The law that the Supreme Court overturned prohibiting corporate donations, that was a law passed in Theodore Roosevelt, not Franklin Roosevelt's, Theodore Roosevelt's second term. Think about that. There was a law in place for over 100 years that the U.S. Supreme Court and Citizens United said, no, you can't prohibit that. So when you look at what passes for conservatism today, it's not conservatism. It is reactionary public policy. Okay, birthright citizenship. That was made a part of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, in 1868. Okay, so in some ways, the people driving the administration want us to go back to the Dred Scott decision without the slavery before 1868. Other times they want us to go back before the administration of Theodore Roosevelt. Some of the things they want us to go back before the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. And in fact, President Trump himself said, oh, the 1890s was a glorious time in United States history. This was when America was on top, totally ignoring that there was a massive maldistribution of wealth in the 1890s, similar to what we have today.
Well, I guess what does we've had Senator Bernie Sanders put out a kind of a series of great YouTube commentary videos about, I think about once a week he'll get on there for about 10 minutes. He's on a kind of a press tour right now. He seems to be I know my generation finds him to be very in touch with the issues we have, issues of unequal distributions of wealth, issues of housing. When it comes to what's actually being done in Congress right now, though, do you find that Democrats are doing what they can to resist?
This is the problem for the Democratic Party in Congress. There was only, to my knowledge, since January 20th of this year, President Trump has only asked Congress to take one action, and that is to defund, in effect, abolish NPR, National Public Radio, and PBS, Public Broadcasting System. Every other action of the federal government he has taken through an executive order. Now, he has a compliant Congress, okay? In that he has a compliant Republican majority in both houses. Okay, I honestly believe that if President Trump said to Congress, I want you to abolish the Department of Education, that would happen, right? That would be able to happen. He didn't do that. He just issued an executive order now saying, okay, it's gone. Well, he can't do that. The Department of Education was established by a law of Congress when Carter was president. It's a law. Establish a department. The President of the United States cannot abolish departments. What the president did to abolish USAID, that's unconstitutional. That's illegal. USAID was formed by an act of Congress, by a law of Congress, when John Kennedy was president. So that's the interesting thing is Johnson as Speaker, Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House, to me is abdicating his constitutional responsibility. He is not saying to the President of the United States, and you don't have to say it publicly, but say privately, boss, you are acting illegally. Ask us to do these things, and we'll be able to do it, right? I mean, look what happened with the budget, which some people were predicting that Johnson did not have the Republican votes, that he was going to have to rely on some Democrats. What happened? Trump had a very serious conversation with Chip Roy, a congressman right here in Central Texas, just to the east of my district, which is now represented by Greg Cesar. Literally, President Trump threatened Congressman Chip Roy and said, if you don't vote for this, I am going to find candidate to run against you in the Republican primary and help get funding for that candidate. And this has been the playbook of President Trump. Threaten Republicans to get in line because of the massive partisan gerrymandering that has been happening in state legislatures for not only state legislative seats, but for congressional seats, House of Representative seats, for at least 30 years. And so now this is the outcome when it comes to public policy and the derangement of our constitutional system. You have Republican districts that are more Republican than they've ever been, and you have Democratic districts that are more Democratic than they've ever been. And so guess what happens? A Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives does not have to care about Democratic citizens in his or her district, doesn't have to care about independents in his or her district, doesn't even have to worry about moderate Republicans in his or her district. What they have to worry about is getting outflanked by the right, all right? More quote-unquote conservative. Same thing for the Democrats. Democrat doesn't have to worry about Republicans, independents in their district. They don't even have to. They have to worry about, what if someone to my so-called left runs against me? Yeah. Okay, because on top of the gerrymandering, another thing is true about our elections. In the Democratic primaries, the average voter in Democratic primaries are to the left of the voter in November who votes for Democratic candidates. Same thing for the Republicans. If you look at Republicans who vote in the primary, they are to the right of the average citizen who votes for Republican candidates in the following November. So it's actually, so it reinforces each other, right? The more extreme voter shows up in the primaries, And they have a disproportionate effect because the districts are drawn to exclude pretty much anybody outside of that party already. And so those two things working together has brought us to this polar, in part, not everything, but those two things have contributed to the polarization of our politics today.
I mean, how do we fix it?
I mean, if I knew that, I probably would be running for office
Right.
and all that, and I could be the Democratic or whatever candidate for president. One thing is, and you mentioned this earlier, and I apologize, I went off on a tangent.
Yeah.
You talked about the communications, right? It's not just the mainstream media. A person can literally not watch anything that doesn't reinforce his or her views. They can watch what? Fox News. They can listen to Newsmax. They can listen to podcasts. And it's in the same communications ecosystem, right? Never challenge their opinions, right? Now, what's ironic is Trump said even in 2015, 2016, oh, yeah, well, the Democrats have the same thing. I mean, yeah, Democrats attack Fox News and Newsmax, but they have the same thing. They're called CBS, ABC, NBC,
MSNBC,
right, and the New York Times, right? So what he was saying is there is a democratic ecosystem, but you pretend it's just the mainstream press. Okay. The difference is there is at least some self-correction. Okay, I don't agree with everything in the editorial page that I read in the New York Times. That's not the point, but it seems to me that when it comes to factual information, right, that I am going to trust, and I put the word trust in quotation marks, I would trust the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, which is very well known as a conservative Midwestern newspaper. In fact, the Chicago Tribune was around in 1860 and endorsed Abraham Lincoln for president. That's how old it is. Wow. New York Times, I am going to trust them when it comes to factual information. That doesn't mean I'm going to follow their editorial page when it comes to voting, much more than I trust Fox News. And one of the reasons is, did you see the depositions that occurred when the Dominion voting system company sued Fox News? And lawyers who know slander law in the United States said, sure, Dominion has a case, but it is very difficult when it comes to political speech to get a conviction. Before the trial happened, anchors, different newscasters, and I use that term loosely, for Fox News, and officials of Fox News, literally in legal depositions, swearing an oath to tell the truth, literally said, Fox News is not a news organization. It's an entertainment organization. Think about that. They have news in the title, but literally they're saying, we're not a news organization. Second thing they said was, oh, people don't take what we say to be true. They're just watching for entertainment reasons. They literally don't believe what we're saying. All right. Now, this is at the same time that after 2020, Fox News repeatedly said election was stolen. Election was stolen. Election was stolen. Why could that company that owned the voting machines, why could it sue? Well, if you believe that the voting machines, thousands of them, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them, could be manipulated, well, you could drive the company out of business, right? That sells those machines. So they literally they could show this is going to cause potential harm to our company. It could drive us out of business. And so, but what did Rupert Murdoch do? He's the grand poobah of it. He's the one who created it from Australia. He's got to be in his 80s. After his deposition, his lawyer said, oh, you did a good job, Chief. And he said, I don't think your opposing attorney thinks I did such a great job. He settled out of court. For millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. And Rupert Murdoch does not like to part with money. Okay, so if I wish the American people would look at the statements of Fox News itself. The people who are the core part of Fox News And they themselves are saying, this isn't news. People don't believe what we say. So why does it matter what we say? I'm sorry. That's really dangerous. That is a total disregard for factual information is dangerous. It's dangerous for a person. It's dangerous for a family. It's dangerous for a community. It's dangerous for a country. We simply can't have that. And so what I would just ask my friends, my colleagues, whatever, is, sure, watch Fox News for an hour, but could you watch CBS? Or could you actually read something? You know, there's so many things on the computer now, right? Right? I mean, I have Yahoo for an email. I purposely don't click email when I type in Yahoo because then it will show stories. It will show news stories. Some of them are analysis. Some are those more opinion. But I try to, what's the Wall Street Journal saying? You know, what, or Salon, or, you know, I try to get a range of sources, right? Because I know that, sure, it can be a feedback loop. And I may not be getting an interpretation or information that maybe I ought to get to have a fuller picture of what is actually going on out there. And I think that people, I mean, I saw it. I saw two friends. They were in the early 80s. The lady actually went to the South in the 1960s to help with the civil rights movement at a potential cost to her. It could have cost her life. Yeah. Her and her husband start watching Fox News in maybe it was early 2015. Every time I talked to him about an issue, I didn't have to watch Fox News. I would ask about an issue, and I got the Fox News sermon of the week. Yeah. Right? You literally could tell what was Fox News talking about every single day of that week. You just ask, what about issue X? And then you get the statement from Pravda, you know, the U.S. equivalent of Pravda, for what they were saying. And look, I understand different ranges of opinion on public policy issues, but don't make up information. Don't lie. I don't understand people who have a complete disregard for the truth just so they can make a little bit of money, or maybe they can get into office. That is extraordinarily destructive to any kind of representative government.
I think we're living in such a unique time, or maybe it's the first time, I mean, human civilization has got to this point to where engaging with reality has never been more optional. To wherever, just with the amount of excess of, you can have your job, you can be living in your small community. You can have an online community. You don't even need a real one, of people who are obsessed with your specific interests. And you don't have to go out. You don't have to engage with reality. You can have your opinions on what is happening nationally, and they can be completely delusional.
Yeah.
But if it's, you know, whether that is kind of this Trumpian rhetoric, or if it's these far left social issues that are just out of step with a lot of Americans' experience, it's just, you see people, whether it's they've got the MAGA hat on and the graphic T-shirt of Trump, or that they have like a tail or something. No offense to the furries out there, and it's like, wow, that's a person who probably doesn't engage a lot with the world around them. It sounds harsh to say, but I think that it's because there's not a physical need to engage with things around you, you know?
Let me respond to that in two different ways, Carter. Mm-hmm. One is, it's ironic, I'm going to use this example because it's from YouTube, right? And so it's like I could stay in my little house and be totally happy. But I saw a person talking, being interviewed, and he had a friend from Mexico. And the Mexican friend said, Mexican national said, yeah, Mexicans and USers treat their homes completely differently, or use their homes completely differently from each other. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, no, they've got to be the same. He goes, no. Mexicans, you know what we do in our home? We sleep. Okay. Every other thing we do, we go out. Mm-hmm. We see our friends at a cafe. We see our friends at a restaurant. We go and see a movie. We go and listen to a political speech. We are outside of the house to do all these things. Go to the gym, whatever. We do all these things out of the house. You create your house in such a way as you have a home gym, right? You have a cable TV system. You have a gigantic TV, and you can watch whatever. You can stream movies. You can stream music. You don't have to go out of the house. You literally have created a space where you can get every single thing you want. Now it even comes to food service deliveries, Uber Eats, and other things. He says, you don't even have to go out to the grocery store. He says, no, we want to engage outside with people. You are more and more insular in your own home. So there is that aspect. Go ahead.
I think just to jump in, the perfect example of kind of what I'm outlining of this optional interaction with reality kind of breaking down, and now reality is really knocking at the door, is I think it was DoorDash introduced, you can start financing your meals. So if you have a burrito, I think it's orders $35 or more. If you're ordering like 4 Chipotle burritos, it's like, don't worry, you can pay us like $7 now, and you can start. And it's just a perfect example of it's like just the reality breakdown, or the rejection of reality breaking down, where it's nothing like an economic recession to really knock you into reality.
Well,
you know?
and then also look at the whole idea of those apps where you can get money before you get your paycheck.
Right.
That's a downward spiral, and people don't realize it. The second thing I wanted to mention, besides that whole idea of how we view our homes, is, again, the computer, right, is... And part of this was the effect of COVID on younger people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people my age, I'm in my 60s, when I thought of computers initially in the 1960s, it was a gigantic room, and it was gigantic machines. No screen. You had keyboards, but you didn't have any screen. Basically, the major innovation of computers, home computing, laptops, is we've turned our computers into televisions. We can watch moving images on our computer. That's not what computers were for in the 40s and 50s and 60s. They were to go through massive amounts of information, numerical information, to be able to solve problems much more quickly. And so by getting our computers much smaller, the advances, incredible advances in the size of our computers. I mean, if I would have told people, if someone had told me and then in my family in the 1960s, people could have a computer in their home, they would laugh at you, saying, what are you talking about? And it takes an entire floor of a building. You can't get a computer that small. But what I mean is, because of advances in technology, you can stream music, you can watch, and again, it comes to you, right? You don't go out to listen to a political speech. You come on and type in Joe Rogan, YouTube, you can hear him. Or Steve Bannon, The War Room out of Washington, D.C. I mean, or is there a Bernie Sanders something going on, right? I mean, you can, I think you said this, you can self-select, and it is right there. You don't have to get out of your chair. And to me, again, the ease of all of this information actually has led to a much narrowing of information the average U.S. person receives.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of, oh my God, this should give us, let's listen to a speech by Lenin to let's listen to a speech by Hitler and everything in between. Instead of this enormous range, we've actually have a much narrower range of information and that we are ingesting in any one time.
And I think there's the issue with dystopian imagery that I think we haven't even figured out yet, kind of as a culture, is that it's a lot more dramatic than the reality of. It's not that, because people imagine one day we're going to have VR goggles and reality can be exactly what we want it to be, and we're going to be completely disconnected from everyone around us. And I think, how are we not there already, aside from the complete immersion, the complete detachment from everything around you?
Well, this is when we really should have done more for young people. And I really mean, when I say young people, I mean grade school, junior high, high school. Because I don't know where I read this or saw this, but a person actually said, a young man, he's now in his 20s, he said that he doesn't feel comfortable talking to someone face to face. Now think about that for a second. It's like, if you would have said that maybe 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, you would have thought, no offense to this young man, you would have thought, okay, he's got a psychological condition.
Right.
Right? Is he at the edge of agoraphobia? You know,
Yeah.
okay. You know, fear of, actually it's from agora, the Greek word for marketplace, right? You stay in your home, right? Look, technology is going to affect human behavior. Let me give you an example, older example. There was a time when your television did not have a remote control. I know. Horrible, right? Parchment. You know, we cooked food over a fire. We didn't have central air conditioning. You know, my God, how did we live? Okay. And then what was the remote control for most families? It was the kids. Turn the, you know, you told whatever kid was closest standing, you change the channel, right?
Yeah.
Now, imagine, you don't have any kids. Imagine a person, no remote control, watching TV, sees the screen for a couple seconds, gets up, turns the station, sees an image for another couple seconds, sits back down, gets back up, turns the station, does that 20 times, changes the station after 2 or 3 seconds of watching, maybe a whole 5 seconds, does that 20 to 30 times. No remote control. They're getting up and down, changing the channel. What would you say to that person?
What are you doing? I mean, yeah.
What are you doing? Are you psychotic? What is your problem? You need to take a chill pill. Now, if a person is sitting in a chair or a couch doing this with remote control, does it look abnormal?
They're a rational human being.
Yeah, it's not abnormal. Yeah, they're changing the channel once every 3 to 5 seconds. It's not abnormal. So a behavior that would be completely whack without the remote control now becomes normal behavior, which gets my point with our attention span is less today. And there's been so many studies done on U.S. people. We have a shorter attention span today in the year 2025 than we had in 1975, than we had in 1980, than we had in 1990, than we had in 2000.
I think this speaks to of these grand predictions about the future that have already come true. Like I think with AI, a lot of people fear that people will become so dependent on it that their breadth of knowledge will be wider, but it'll be very shallow knowledge. No one will have really an expertise in anything because the AI can handle all the difficult issues about health, about politics, about, you know. And I think we're already kind of there to wherever depth of knowledge of history of cultural events. There's kind of, I've noticed that throughout TikTok and stuff, like Theodore Roosevelt is a character. It's kind of like a character that has gone around in a lot of these kind of like reviving masculinity circles. And I think it's great. I think there are so many things about Roosevelt that's a positive influence. I mean, he lived the strenuous life, I mean, as he called it. But it's interesting that you crack open the history books and then it's a very different idea. And I'm not a fan of this view of history that we need to tear down everything we possibly can for any possible reason. But then you just get weird moments like that. And we're living through it with Trump in real time of just active historical revisionism happening of like, I'm tapping into too many ideas at the same time here. But I think first, one of the results of this kind of TikTokification of reality, of the second something's boring, you run away from it, is cultural amnesia we have for things that happened just a few years ago. Like the first Trump presidency, I didn't see that in any conversation when he was on the campaign trail of, well, let's look at what he actually did and let's look what he's promising here. For like the North Atlantic Trade Treaty, how that that's what it's called, right?
Oh, actually, I think it's called U.S. Canada-Mexico Agreement.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
or I
you.
might have got the last two flipped.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was what, 2018?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was under him, and a lot of people see that as just kind of a win, like an objective win of his first term. And then he turns around, and as you had mentioned the other day, he calls it one of the worst deals done ever. And I think that's just perfectly symbolic of where we are. And,
Sure.
And two, on the flipping channels thing, to me, so much entertainment has become gambling. I mean, there's that gambling circuit in the brain that clearly can be abused so easy. And I guess all addictive behaviors kind of plays into that too. But take something like TikTok. You open the app, you open it for the first time, right? And you're not searching for anything. You're just swiping and swiping and swiping. And with YouTube, you can waste a million years on YouTube. But at least most of the time, you're actively searching for something. If I want to watch a video essay about whatever period in French history or whatever, and then you're watching that for 18 hours or whatever. But with TikTok, you're just scrolling and scrolling, and based on previous experience, that about every 5 minutes you'll probably laugh out loud. So you think, I'm willing to go through, for about 3 seconds. So like, I'm willing to go through 4 minutes and 57 seconds of basically nothingness. Skip, then finally get there. And I think it's just, there's this element too that I guess the secret to living a long life that I think I've already kind of tapped into a little bit is just doing things that you remember. And that sounds so obvious, but a vacation you went on when you were 17 years old, you probably remember that much better than another weekend of life at 34.
Sure.
So, but with TikTok, just so many things get memory hold. I ask anyone in the audience, if you're similar to my age, you've probably seen about 200,000 TikToks minimum in your life. Name all of them. Name all of them. Like name 15 off the top of your head that you've seen. Two things might happen. You might not be able to, or you'll just be embarrassed with what you come up with. If you're like, that's not stuff that I really identify with. So there's that too.
Sure.
With all this accessibility to hobbies and interests and subcultures that we have through the internet, it's become this thing that like, I hate TikTok, but I would be lying to you if I said it wasn't a hobby of mine. I mean, sometimes I'm on it 2 hours a day. Anything I would do for 2 hours a day, I would say that's a substantial portion of my life.
Sure.
So that kind of like
and think of the follow through on your point, Carter.
Yeah.
Think of what that means. I mean, if yours, and it could be anybody, but if a person is spending 2 hours on TikTok, think of opportunity costs when it comes to time.
Yeah.
Then that means that person who's spending 2 hours on TikTok is not spending 2 hours on playing a musical instrument.
Yeah.
Right? Going to the gym and exercising, maybe learning how to draw or paint, or actually talking to a friend. You know, hey, let's take a walk. Let's just, because look how many parks we have in San Marcos, right? Especially near Purgatory Creek off of Wonder World Drive. Yeah, you could walk and have a conversation, and you're outside, you're moving, and it's just healthier. And it would be psychologically healthier. This is what people don't realize. This is also going to have incredible negative psychological and physical negative effects over the lifetime. Mm-hmm. I hate flat shoes that are given to babies, right? Because babies will not walk on them. I don't like loafers, okay? And then people can make fun of me for the treaded shoes I wear, but I've seen people fall for no good reason because their shoe had no tread on it and they slipped on smooth cement. There was a case where a man was called in and a psychologist had given all this psychological diagnosis for this young baby who didn't want to walk. I shouldn't say baby by this time, I don't know, toddler. I don't know different ages for little kids. And the man looked at the kid and said, take off your child's shoes. Took off the shoes, and he said, now, stand, but little kid with the toes, right? Zoomed across the room, smiled, giggling, laughing. Yeah. Right. Of course she was concerned. Of course she was upset. Of course she was anxious because she didn't feel like she had a sure footing with those expletive deleted shoes that never should be worn by a baby, by a toddler, by a 1-year-old, by a 1.5-year-old, by a 2-year-old. Don't give your kid, let them run around with bare feet. Okay. And so, but, and the computers and the video games, young people, especially their teenage years, are not as physically active as people were. And again, I'm not saying my childhood, my adolescence was a golden time that should be repeated by everybody, but there was more physical activity. You played sports, you went and played tennis. You went and maybe you went for football or basketball or wrestling, baseball. And guess what? Now what do? No, you play basketball on a video screen. You play baseball on a video screen. You can bowl on a video screen. I mean, all of it is you're performing those sports, but you're not. You're sitting on your behind, and you're not getting the physical movement of exercise, the mind-body coordination, the physical fitness, and so that's going to have long-term. The less someone is moving when they're younger, the more problems they're going to have as an adult, 40 years plus. They're going to have more problems. It could be cardiovascular. It could be their joints. It could be any number of things. they're going to have more problems. And they're not going to get the psychological benefit. Your blood starts flowing. Think about this for a second. They even have found a correlation, didn't say causal, but a correlation between people who chew gum and less chance of getting dementia.
Whoa.
Now think about it. You're moving your jaw constantly. Well, does that mean blood is moving in your head more? If you're walking, if you're running, if you're playing sports, your blood is flowing more consistently throughout your whole body, right? And so the long-term benefit of that could be on something we don't even think about, and that is less chance of dementia. But it's also helping for everything with our joints, our elbows, our knees, our thighs, our ankles, everything. And so that's another thing that and remember, you can do a basketball game by yourself. You can't play a basketball game in real life by yourself. You don't call it playing a basketball game, do you? No, you're practicing shooting.
Yeah.
You're not playing basketball by yourself, but you can play basketball, and you just get inserted. Your avatar gets inserted in a game.
Two things real quick. I want to touch on your point, but also I want to put a cap on the kind of TikTok thought experiment and memory a second ago.
Sure.
I think more proof of this is half the TikToks you've ever seen in your life, or YouTube Shorts, whatever it be, if they were to be shown to you, you'd probably say, I don't remember that. Or, oh, now that you showed me, I kind of remember that, but there's not really a lot of value. Whereas movies, any movie you've seen in your life, if I showed you the poster, you could probably tell me something about it. Who directed it, a song from it you liked, a character you thought was funny, when it came out, something. So that just kind of goes to my theory of like living a longer life. It sounds so obnoxious, but it's true. Living a longer life depends on what you engage with. The more I think we're, as a culture, we need to find a difference between what is meaningful and what is stimulating.
Put another way, I wish I could remember who wrote this, but it gets to boredom, right?
Yeah.
People don't want to be bored.
I think like a director like David Lynch, his work depends on you being bored a little bit. It sounds weird, but like Blue Velvet, there are sections of it where it's quiet for a good second that a modern audience is uncomfortable by. That a studio would say that's bad business. You might lose the audience at that point. But he goes, that's the point. That's the art. You know what I mean?
Look at the number. Do an experiment. Watch commercials on television. Count the number of seconds per each shot within that commercial. Is it 3 seconds? Is it 4 seconds? Because when you really think of a commercial, you think of it as one 30-second unit. But if you divide that commercial advertisement on television into different camera shots, what you'll realize is they're much shorter now than they were even 25 years ago. What's really interesting is to watch commercials from the television commercials from the 1950s. They would literally have a 3-minute commercial. There was almost like a story arc of a commercial, and you think to yourself, now 3 minutes? Are you insane? How can you sustain an advertisement for 3 minutes? So now we have gotten accustomed to 30-second. Even sometimes a 15-second commercial, but certainly 30-second and 60-second commercials, right? And now think about how that affects our politics. If you would have told people in 1948 that the majority of the American people would determine their vote for president because of television commercials, they would have laughed at you and said, no, the American people aren't that stupid. Because we watch television, we watch moving images, and television and any moving image medium is a entertainment medium. Okay? You don't have to engage your frontal lobe as much when you're seeing moving images. Now, when you're reading a text, when you're trying to understand an article, an op-ed piece, an editorial, a book, an essay, even a novel, right? Poetry, you have to actively engage the text in front of you. You have to say, I'm not surface reading. I'm trying to get at what does this text mean? Not with a bunch of moving images. Why do you think animation is so much fun? I love animation. I love all kinds of different kinds of animation. But I know it's a different experience for me to watch, Toy Story,
Yeah.
Inside Out, whatever. That's a different experience. It's interconnecting me with my emotions, right? And not just laughing. It could be sad, right? Not with the text. You have to engage in it. And so what has happened is we spend as a people, as a nation, so little time reading. And when you do ask people, oh yeah, I read books. No offense, but it's the Twilight Saga.
Yeah.
In the old days it was Anne Rice and the vampire stuff, right? And we seem to go back and forth, vampires, and then it's zombies, and then it's vampires, and it's zombies. I think we don't do the vampire thing anymore. We're more zombie.
You got werewolves too.
Oh, werewolves, yeah, you don't forget them. But the point is, right? It's what you could call pulp fiction.
Yeah.
Right. A kind of newer version of pulp fiction, or kind of like the romance novel, right? The gothic romance novel, guy with with a bare chest holding a beautiful woman on the cover of the book, right? You go, oh, I guess this is a love lust story, right?
Yeah.
And basically it's the same thing, but written 500 different titles. Right? It's like if you ever see there was one animation studio, very, very simple animation. But I'm calling it simple in storyline. Casper the Ghost, and also it was Baby Huey. It was a gigantic duck. Story arc was exactly the same. Casper the Friendly Ghost, Baby Huey, tries to interact with somebody. Somebody's mean to him. He's sad. He goes away. Oh, so sad. And then in the middle section, oh my God, the person or persons who were mean to him now are under threat. And then Casper and Baby Huey, here I come to save the day. And the resolution, they help the people out. Everybody hold hands, sing Kumbaya. If you watch every single Casper the Ghost cartoon, that's the storyline. That's why something like, and remember, that's later. That's why I love the chaos, the insanity of Looney Tunes. Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd, the whole crew. Creativity in what they're showing you, the storyline of what they're telling you. I mean, Yosemite Sam and Bugs Bunny out west. Are you kidding me? Yeah, that's great, because there was actually some kind of sense of story to it, and you didn't know what you were going to see every single time you saw a Looney Tunes cartoon. It was going to be different. It was going to be different. Same thing with the Flintstones. That was a very popular late afternoon animated TV show in the 1960s. And Fred would do something stupid. And then think about it. People say that Family Guy is based on The Simpsons, which on the surface, sure. Husband and wife, and they have 3 kids. In The Simpsons, it's 2 girls and a boy. In Family Guy, it's 2 boys and a girl. Actually, when you think of the character of Peter, it's actually based on the Flintstones, which is actually based on the Honeymooners, the Jackie Gleason sitcom of the 1950s. Because in fact, Family Guy writers have acknowledged this in how they end their sitcom now. They sit on the couch and they say, are we really going to do this? Meaning, are we going to come up with a moral for the show that you just all saw? Or they say it to each other, and they're not meta. They don't look at the screen. But they go, and so one time you actually hear them do this. They'll say, wah, 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 wah. They don't even use words. It's the cadence of the speech of Peter and Lois talking to each other about what they learned. That's how formulaic Family Guy has become. And that's the problem. If you're bored, if you don't let yourself be bored, if you don't take a walk, if you don't shoot even baskets by yourself, you don't play musical instrument, you don't call up a friend and say, hey, let's just run around, let's play some tennis. You're going to want, it's consumer culture. You are demanding from consumer culture not to be bored. So you will consume any crap that's visually being shown to you, even if it's not that funny. Even if it's not, it didn't cost me anything. Excuse me, it cost you a half hour of your life. Mm-hmm. What are you not doing because you're bored? You know, I mean, think about it. You're taking classes. You have to spend a certain amount of time with the material. And I don't know. Remember the figure, but was it 100 hours to get good in something?
And 10,000 hours.
Okay, 10,000 hours. I mean, and that's what scares me, is that in all the possibilities of fantastic entertainment that actually could cause you to think, right? Even if it's a Shakespearean play that's in movie form, like Julius Caesar with James Mason and Marlon Brando and John Gielgud from the 1950s. That's, even though, yeah, it's an hour and a half, close to 2 hour movie. It's going to be less than the whole stage play, but it's real. I mean, it's real, you know, and it's quality.
Or like, I play guitar very casually. If all the time I spend on entertainment, just in the past 4 years that I got put into guitar playing, I'd be a virtuoso. It's stuff like that makes you look at someone like Da Vinci, who in Walter Isaacson's biography, one of the first sentences is Leonardo da Vinci had the good fortune of being born a bastard. Because of that, there was no social expectation on him. So he could spend his whole life kind of wandering and experimenting and creating, and no one was there to go, it's time for you to get, you know, a real job. I think in today's world, we have simultaneously the greatest opportunity to be kind of a polymath, a jack of all trades, wherever all the information is right there. We could be sitting in this room. If I have this phone, theoretically, I could become an expert in a number of fields, right? If I was here long enough and focused enough. We also have kind of this specialization. I'm curious what to say about this as someone in academics, like the specialization that's taken over all the society. Like someone like Kant was, I think there's a point where he was, even while he was writing Critique of Pure Reason, which is considered like his magnum opus, his complex work, he was simultaneously a professor of like politics, geology, mineralogy, like mathematics, obviously philosophy. Just what do you think specialization, what do you think that's going to bring us?
Yeah, isn't that the irony? We're in this bind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, specialization of knowledge has helped so much. Think of medicine, right?
Yeah.
Think of health. You know, specialization actually is a great boon for human beings. But at the same time, you know, there is the danger of learning more and more about less and less, right? And if there isn't a sense of, well, wait a second, what about these others? I mean, I have the highest respect for people who are extraordinarily good at a craft, at a subject matter, you know, professors in and outside of the university, craftsmen, you know, woodworkers, metal workers, mechanics. I mean, my God, you know, that's a real skill. But the problem is we seem, in that specialization of knowledge, our ability to look at something or hear an argument or hear somebody, we seem to have less of ability to hear something and say, bovine scatology. Right? Our bovine scatology meter doesn't seem to be working as well as it did maybe 100 years ago. And so what is it about and I'm not going to blame our education system. Our education system is part of the whole country. But if you look at Finland, the Finnish education system, kindergarten to 12th grade, grade school kids, starting roughly around 4th grade, are taught, hey, we're going to provide you information. We're going to provide you what seems to be information. We want you to look at this, and we want you to be able to say, oh, that's an argument based on authority. That's not really proving the point. Or that's an argument that is actually a circular argument. Right? They're actually teaching, starting in 4th grade, the ability to rationally receive information, receive input, I mean, whatever you want to call it, communication theory, and for them to parse it and to say, oh, no, wait a second, that's not a very good argument. We're not doing that. At least in Texas, what they're doing is forcing these kids for now over 30 years to take a standardized test, and what makes it worse, they will have and you've been through it, haven't you? Yeah. There will be a text, a paragraph, right? And then there'll be a question or two or more about that paragraph. And it'll say, okay, this paragraph on this subject means XYZA, right? You have a choice of 4 or 5. Okay. Now, what's insidious about it is because it's an interpretation of a paragraph, but they pretend that there's one answer. I mean, come on. Could you imagine looking at a paragraph of Moby Dick and saying, "Oh yeah, there's one answer here"?
Right.
For God's sake, no. There's at least two acceptable interpretations of it. Not in the standardized test. That is why the teachers will teach the test. They're not even teaching subject matter anymore. And again, when I brought this up to a friend, he said, "Oh, you know why that happened? Because in West Texas in the 1980s, there was a football player, as they call him, a football player who graduated high school, didn't know how to read, but his father was a very important person in town. He was in oil or something. So of course, this kid doesn't know how to read in 12th as he graduates from 12th grade. So that means yes, we have to change everything throughout the entire state." See the idiocy, see the madness of that? No, why don't you say to the man, "Yeah, I know you're very powerful, but you're actually hurting your son by coming in here and screaming and saying, 'Why aren't you passing my son?'" Okay, so here we have, what would you call it? Psychology, interpersonal relations, power structure within a community with oil. I mean, you could, let's get Bernie Sanders in on this and how he's going to explain it. But there's lots of different explanations, right? But no, our solution was to put a statewide mandate. You must do this, isn't it 3 times? 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade, which has hurt our public education system in the state of Texas.
I think it also has people of my generation growing up with this idea that a degree equals expertise. I want to be careful saying that because obviously if you have a medical degree, you know more about medicine than some average Joe open up a textbook for the first time. But something like a political science, take the podcast world, there are political commentators, there are journalists that know more about political science than I will after I get my degree next year. But whenever there is the on-paperism, I have that credential and they don't, which I think really sucks because even the opportunity for an interview in a field that might involve that, if they don't have that credential,
yes,
they're not even going to get the interview. It's
Right.
like you don't even get a chance to sit down and let's hear what you have to say. No,
Yeah.
So I think that is I think with this whole question of where are the polymaths then? Where are these Renaissance people that are succeeding? And I think for better and for worse, they've moved to entrepreneurship. I think what made me think of that is in the kind of credentials and interview question. I know that Peter Thiel, an interview question he uses a lot, and I think this is such a great question, is tell me something that you think is true that majority people think is not true. Because that really forces you to think, and there's a deep element to that, but there's also like kind of obvious thing, and that's innovation. It's pointing out the obvious that no one's ever seen before, But yeah, and I think in this age of social media and Trump, I mean, for example, there's so many great academics, there's so many great writers that have put out great stuff since 70s, 80s, 90s, that now with this kind of new world we're stepping into, where I think if Trumpism is just the cult of personality being turned up to 11, I think there are several responses to that. One that could be to just deny it or try to move away from it, which is like whatever. And then I think you have Gavin Newsom kind of I think the shot heard around the world that for Democrats to move forward, they're going to need to embrace the strategies. Him starting that podcast. And not only did he start a podcast, he, as far as I know, has only had on conservative commentators. And people like Charlie Kirk, people like Steve Bannon, I believe he's had another gentleman on. And I think that's the thing of it's whoever ends up being president for my generation or the generation under me, or even someone 10 years older than me, I don't think it's going to be that a route like, oh, they did some great military service, they got a law degree, they went and practiced law, and then they started getting involved in politics. Or just they went to law school, they became a professor, then they got involved in politics. It's going to have to be somebody who has an internet following. Like, Mr. Beast that has over 300 million followers. If he ran for president, he'd win. And I'm not just saying that because he's popular and he has money. I'm saying that because his mind is, I know exactly how to get attention and how to get it in an effective way. And that is much better than what a think tank room can come up with.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Thanks for pointing that out. People have been working through this for a while, even before Trump's reemergence in 2024 and his election victory. And that is, when you look at Democratic leaders, overwhelmingly they're from law. And then in law, what do? You construct a logical argument, right? Here's evidence. Here's my point. This is the nub of the case. This is where I'm showing that guilty or innocent, right? Think of the Republicans. They're more public relations, and public relations is effectively selling. And again, this goes back to how are people receiving their information about politics and government? What is the form? Are they reading? I mean, when network news started in the 1950s, the evening news was only 15 minutes long. Okay. The news networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, it was in the early 60s that they said, no, we need to punch this up to 30 minutes. Okay. Now, even with 30 minutes, the people, Walter Cronkite, name you might not know, Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, they assumed, of course, that you're going to be reading something, that we, in this 30 minutes minus commercial time, we simply can't not give you everything, right? So we are presupposing that you are getting information about government politics from other written sources, right? Not just watching us on television. And in fact, if you look in the 60s and 70s into the 80s, probably even longer, what's striking is the number of times a news story on the evening news would start with the words, "The New York Times reported today." Think about that for a second. The New York Times reported yesterday, right? The Los Angeles Times report. So they're literally getting their news stories from a decent newspaper. Okay. Now, to your point, you're not watching ABC, CBS, NBC evening news. You're listening to podcasts. Because why? Is it partly entertainment? I mean, remember, Joe Rogan got known to a lot of people in the United States because of a sitcom called News Radio. And he was more the tech guy. He was the one who was the mechanical. He was the one who actually fixed things, right? He wasn't on the air. And then he had a very successful stand-up career. Right. Again,
Fear Factor. He was the host.
Yeah, Fear Factor of them. And did you ever see him at one of his stand-up? I don't know if it was an HBO special, what it was, but he was actually talking about that. He said he was at home getting high, smoking marijuana, when his agent called and said, "Hey, you want to do the Fear Factor thing?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm not doing anything else." And remember when he says that, that's like 20 years ago. And so, but like he felt perfectly comfortable saying this to a group of people in an audience, and he was making fun of the Fear Factor, saying you can, he was recreating one of the scenes, saying, "Yeah, you can do this," like step into a gigantic tub filled with snakes. "No, I believe in you. You can do this. Just tough it out," And he says, "What? This is insane, right?" So now this is him saying this after the fact about a television program that actually helped him even get more, right? More visibility, more. Oh, Joe Rogan. Yeah, I know. Yeah. He's the host of that Fear Factor thing. And then look at Trump. I mean, Trump's skill is in presentation. And I'm getting that phrase. Ever see Schindler's List?
No.
I don't want to reduce Schindler's List to this. I mean, it's massively important. But Schindler says to people, "I don't know how to produce anything. I don't know anything about production, but I do know presentation." And we would use the word public relations, right? We would say advertising, but he said presentation. And I think that is a great word because Trump presented himself as a successful businessman. And why did many people in the United States believe in 2016 that he was a successful businessman? Because he was not the host, but I don't know what to call him. He was the main draw for the TV show The Apprentice.
He was the personality. He's why you
Yes.
watched.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. He's the guy. Right. So think about it. In The Apprentice, Donald Trump plays a successful businessman. So people watching said, "Oh, he's playing a successful businessman on TV. I guess he's a successful businessman." Even by 2015, his companies declared bankruptcy 3 times. He was notorious in New Jersey because his companies would not pay vendors, would not pay contractors. And many, many contractors who had been around for 20 years went out of business because his employees would actually be told to tell them, sure, go ahead and sue us. You're just going to spend money on a lawsuit. You're going to win and you're never going to get your money, because no one's ever gone to jail for not paying a civil suit, contract. So go away. So there's no way New Jersey will ever vote for Trump because of the sheer number of people who have been businesses who went under because his companies under his direction refused to pay, right? Think of Trump Steaks, failure. Trump Bank, failure. Trump University, failure. What do they all have in common? He had everything to do with those three. When his businesses do very, very well, and this is actually a friend of mine who actually voted for him in 2016 said this. He said, Trump is not a very good businessman. His businesses work when he hires very good people and leaves them alone. What Trump is good at is public relations, selling himself, selling the brand. And so this is the sadness, right? What's reality? The facade. We have created, there's an old term from Russia, in Imperial Russia, the Potemkin villages. Potemkin villages. There was a Russian government official to Catherine the Great who would literally, you think this is out of Blazing Saddles, would literally create facade little towns, little villages that Catherine could take her carriage through. But there was really no building behind it. It was just, oh yeah, this is prosperous little village. And that's where the term Potemkin village came from. This sense of, no, we're going to create this false reality. And then everybody, then the empress is happy. But we've created our own Potemkin villages that we appear to be living in. And in a scary way, we're starting to not have the ability to realize, no, this isn't really real.
I know my dad is listening. He's probably jumping up and down right now. He's made that exact point. That's really funny. And I learned about what the villages were just to engage with them. That's really funny. Yeah, with these issues of kind of like if we are at the point where reality of the individual has a role in defining the reality they experience, they have a substantial role in that. I think that throughout every point in history, you just ask yourself, what if people were just better people? What if they didn't burn down the Library of Alexandria? And it's like, okay, well, of course, everything becomes better. You know what I mean? Under that lens. But I think we're at the point where that question becomes a lot more, they're much greater stakes. I mean, if AI gets to the point where you can generate whatever kind of images you want of any individual, the mind wanders of how horrifying that can be. And it's up to, it's either we live in a complete surveillance state and have no freedoms, or it's we figure out how to be better people.
Well, and that solution is never going to be final. Yeah. I mean, every generation, every group of people, it could be a country, a town, a family, makes mistakes, and you're embarrassed, when you're not the person you would hope you were going to be. But, at least on an interpersonal level, you ask for forgiveness, and you try to do better. And I think it's better. We can try to do better. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to be the best. But if we consciously say, I'm going to work to be better, I think that would be the way to go.
And the impulse is to look at this kind of idealism and laugh and snicker and go, oh, that's not going to. But, I mean, I remember in your class last semester, we read a piece by Kant written in the late 1700s, him saying that this some kind of international organization that makes trade, that makes peace a lot more possible, that kind of gets greater communication, but also preserves the culture of each country. That kind of international body would be very beneficial. I'm sure at the time, it was completely laughed at for writing something like that. It's like, that would never happen. I mean, maybe it took Nazi Germany trying to take over the world to accomplish it, but we have had something like that. We have the UN, we have NATO, we have the EU. I mean, these bodies that do their best, not perfect, but they really do their best in the pursuit of that goal. So I think that's interesting that people, something's laughable and then it's a miracle, and then it's a fact of life that we take for granted, you know?
Oh, always. And you can even look at this at a much narrower place when it comes to medicine. Pasteur, Louis Pasteur, when he first said, yeah, there's these things we can't see with the naked eye that are alive
Yeah.
that are causing these diseases or whatever, viruses. He was a lunatic, right? Well, from being totally laughed at, I think it was roughly 20, 25 years later, his microbe, his bacteria version or view of disease became the new norm, became the new orthodoxy, to the point that doctors were refusing to believe that yellow fever, was it yellow fever that came from a mosquito? Right?
Yeah.
And so it was like, no, it had to be public health. It had to be public cleanliness. And so the United States military, oh my God, Havana was power washed in the late 1890s, early 1900s, and there was still yellow fever. And it was a Cuban doctor who said, stop looking for bacteria. It's caused by a mosquito, and I can tell you the species of mosquito that causes it. And he was right. So, this is what's so bizarre is, I wish we would be more open to multiple truths, little t. Why does there have to be, and we do this in the United States more often, I think, than other countries, at least recently. Oh, there's got to be a solution. There's a magic bullet. No. What will a doctor tell you? Well, he's not going to tell you. You're in your 20s. You're in great shape. But what will a doctor tell a middle-aged person? I need to get into better shape. I need to lose some weight. What will a doctor say? Say two things, right? It's never one thing. It's like, get up off your behind, do something physically active, and modify your diet. Now we know this, right? Modify your diet, be more physically active. And I wish we would take that approach to our country. There's probably not one solution. But if we do something here, and do something here, and do something there, and do something in the fourth area at the same time, right? Do I think that wind and solar power are going to permit us to manufacture steel? No. Don't put that burden on wind power and solar power. But yeah, they could generate electricity. Yeah, they could heat your home, right? And when you look at all these things, if you put all these things together, what about conservation? What about having higher gas mileage on your automobile? What about, I don't know, why don't I walk a block or two instead of getting into my car? Why do we conserve? Why do we put more insulation in homes, right? If you do multiple things at the same time, what about nuclear power? Basically, nuclear power is fission, breaking apart atoms that heats water. I mean, it's a very advanced technology that is doing something very old. Heating water, creating steam, so you're moving pistons. That's what you're doing. So, I mean, why? I mean, there's multiple truths always, and it scares me that we seem to be less open to the idea that there's multiple true things that are true at the same time.
What do you think is one of those that the American public, right, left, wherever, really needs to tap into at this moment?
Well, I mean, that's why I gave the example, energy, fuel. I mean, I do not, look, what is it? What's the figure? I'll be conservative and say 13% of our energy needs right today in the United States are coming from solar and wind. And ironically enough, do you know where the top three wind? Do you know the top three wind states are in terms of generation of electricity? Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. It's not politics, it's natural geography, right? I mean, why do we have tornadoes? Because the Rocky Mountains run north-south, they don't run east-west. India doesn't have tornadoes because of the Himalayas. We have a continent where you have warm air coming from the Gulf, and then you have cold air coming from the Arctic by way of Canada, and you have that's why, well, at least until recently, we were in Tornado Alley. So what I would say is, and look at it, Ford Motor Company, I mentioned that yesterday, $2 billion investment. Now, President Trump has frozen funds that had already been approved by Congress, had already been allocated for Ford. No, you're not getting that. Now, Ford made a $2 billion investment in electronic vehicles with the expectation, promised congressional law that said, yes, we're going to be giving you some money. Okay. How are businesses supposed to be making long-term investment decisions if a president of the United States can flip a switch and say, no, you're not getting that, even though Congress approved it and it's there to be allocated? No, I'm deciding, I'm telling people, no, don't send it to them. And so for me, energy, what about public transportation? We have to make government construction projects easier to do. Public transportation, California, way behind. I mean, they've had plans for 20 years. They haven't built anything. I shouldn't say anything, but BART, you have the Bay Area Regional Transit that is in the Oakland, San Francisco. That's functioning. But look at Los Angeles, and how many years have people in Los Angeles complaining about traffic jams? Hello, Los Angeles is begging for some kind of public transportation system. And so we just have to do better. We have to say, hey, let's help people with solar panels. If the federal government said to solar panel manufacturers, we're going to put solar panels in a great arc on U.S. government buildings from, say, roughly Washington, D.C., through the Southeast, across the lower Mississippi River Valley, through Texas, to the West Coast, and even you could do this sometimes with the Rocky Mountains even. Solar panels on U.S. government buildings. Now, if you phased it in, that would provide such an income for these companies, they could lower the price of solar panels. And all of a sudden, people who can't afford a solar panel now for their home now could, because you've reached economies of scale, right? It's that simple. A ballpoint pen cost something like $100 in 1945. That was a gift you gave somebody who had everything, right?
Yeah.
Well, what does a ballpoint pen cost now?
Pack of 10 for like $2.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I remember big pens. I think there was 10 of them. You could buy them for 89 cents. Now, that was probably when I was in college, but that was actually how they advertised it, right? Hey, 89 cents, you get 10 pens. It's like, hey, that sounds like a good deal to me, right? So if the government, same thing with the vaccines we talked about last night. I think it was maybe it was in my class. The reason why people could afford the COVID vaccines is because the federal government said to the pharmaceutical company, what? We want to buy 200 million vaccines from you. Oh, wow. Now think of the price per unit of vaccine that the pharmaceutical company could charge the United States government and still make a nice profit. Yeah. But if you and I walked in there and said, hey, how much are you going to, well, you give us $10,000, right? But if you're buying that many, then it works. And that's why government exists, because it can do things. It is designed to do things, not based on the market, but based on the need of the national community, the people who live in your country. That's who you're trying to help.
Well, Dr. Ed, thank you for coming on the show. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, this has been great. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.